We're delving into the belly of the beast on this week's Gaming the Podcast as Stace Harman and myself, John Robertson, discuss and explore Resident Evil 1's Mansion. What makes it so revered? How has it stood the test of time so well? And how does its design impact everything that occurs in the game? As a heads up, next week's episode is also about the original Resident Evil, although from a more all-encompassing, holistic perspective, and that's to celebrate the game's 25th anniversary, which falls on the 22nd of March 2021. Don't forget you can come chat with us on Twitter about all things Resident Evil and all things gaming. We are at Indie by Design. And check out our website, indiebydesign.net, to check out and get yourself a copy of our video game books, which include Oddworld Abe's Origins and 20 Double Fine Years, which are made in conjunction with Oddworld Inhabitants and Double Fine Productions, respectively. Again, that's indiebydesign.net. And so, on with the episode, and here's Stace Harman.
We've been talking a lot recently about single location game spaces, and I think that conversation has to start and certainly include for a large part the mansion in the original Resident Evil game, which I think for me is one of the most iconic and one of the greatest single location game spaces of the last 25 years. But what is it, do you think, that makes it so iconic? What makes it so? What are its strengths? Why does it work, both from a gameplay perspective and also from a thematic standpoint?
Yeah. Well, from a thematic standpoint, I guess one of the big things in its favour, certainly at the time, I remember first playing that, and just like before we get into any of like the deeper questions about why it's a great game space, like, it just looked great, didn't it? Like the static backgrounds that Capcom used, and the detail that they could draw from that, and the lighting that they could apply to that, and the static camera angles, so it was very cinematic. Like they could control the visual element completely, and you compare that to other games at the time, and that they're using like sort of fully like 3D geometry and textures applied to the walls and stuff, like.
Something like Tomb Raider, which came out, around the same sort of time.
You compare the backgrounds, the environment graphics of Tomb Raider to Resident Evil, and it's incomparable, really. I think not until like Res 2 or Final Fantasy 7 as well had brilliant backgrounds, but again they were static background. So from that angle, it was just kind of, I don't want to say awestruck because it's a bit sort of sycophantic, but it's visually
arresting. It's the kind of thing that sticks with you for sure. Yeah. So that's So then it looked great.
It just had this impact, just this incredible visual impact, and it's not long after like the NES era as well. NES, the SNES era. And the Mega Drive, you're coming from like the best looking games there, like Zelda, Mario, and then you're coming into Resident Evil like a couple of years later. It's like, what the hell? What's happened? Like just incredible leap. But it also stands up, doesn't it? Because it's not like, it was amazing for its time, and that is its single biggest contribution. That it was a watershed moment and no more. Like, you go back and play it, like we have both done recently, and there is a lot on a game design level and a narrative level that's going on, as well as just that it looks pretty awesome. Yeah, well, I think this idea of the illusion of space in video games is not new. Like it's spoken about a lot, usually in a way of making the game space feel a lot bigger, a lot more real, I guess, that like the adventure that you're taking part in happens in a larger space. It's not just that these corridors, these doors, these buildings, this field or whatever is the only place on Earth, or the only place that the entire some parts of this world. It's that it takes place in something bigger. So I'm thinking like the famous opening train monorail system. Opening in Half-Life, where you go along and see all the different building, seeing all the different rooms and through the windows, makes the base seem really big. And Journey is also very good at this. Like, it seems like you're in this open plain all the time, like this sort of sandy desert plain, but actually you're not.
Both of them give you horizons of sorts, don't they? They show you things that that's in one case you may get to at some point, and in the other case you perhaps will never get to. You'll never see some of these things. They're just there for setting, but it's starting big and then narrowing in.
So they use illusion of space to make make everything seem grand and you're part of this grand story. Call of Duty does it as well in single player. Yes, it's a corridor shooter for the most part, although that's a bit unfair because it's not always. But a lot of most Call of Duty campaigns are kind of typically corridor shooters, but they do a great job of making it seem like, you know, there might be only this one road in this town that the firefight is happening in, but the whole town is kind of rendered around you. And that does do a good job of making it feel like you're taking part in something bigger than just you firing a gun at someone. But Resident Evil 1 Mansion does have the illusion of space as well, but it does it in a very different way. So instead of showing you things, it locks things away from you, but shows you the lock and, in this case, the door. So when you first go into that mansion, there's only one door that you can go in, but there's lots of doors. You can immediately go upstairs and look around and do whatever you want, and all the doors are closed. So there's the illusion of space in that there's a promise of something being behind that door that is presumably going to be interesting and going to lead to some new area. So it makes the mansion feel really big on a level design, playing space degree. But by not actually showing you what's there, it keeps that claustrophobia, it keeps the mystery, it keeps the kind of tension and horror really high. So,
and the mystery is key to that, I think, isn't it? Because they could have had a flyover shot in the helicopter where you see the entire complex. That could have been a very specific thing, and they chose very much not to do that. So yeah, that mystery is certainly retained by shooting it in that way.
Yeah, it's an odd thing actually, because so when you say that, so I'd never really thought about this before, but presumably the characters do have a sense of how big the mansion is because they've seen it when running up to it, and then I've seen how wide it is and how many stories there are, at least I would assume.
In passing though, because they are being chased by rabid zombie dogs
and it is night time and there's trees everywhere.
I just had but
I think on replaying it, that was one of the most interesting things, because the mansion does have the illusion of space by what's behind that door, that sort of, you know, that typical very standard horror question. But yeah, it does it in a really clever way, so as not to limit the feeling of claustrophobia and horror. So it limits the space both physically through having a large mansion but locked doors, but then also kind of psychologically at the same time. And I think that's it's one of those things that's really obvious, I suppose. Like it's not like a super great insight, but like it is one of those things that I guess you need to actively think about in order to notice just how skillfully that has been achieved.
Yeah, and and I think the locked doors are very important to that sense of choice as well, because although you feel like I think initially it feels like you do have choice. You find out the doors are locked subsequently, but then you understand that at some point you will go behind those doors. You will find out what's going on. And so that is far more effective than just presenting you with you walk in, there's a single door in front of you and that's it. You can't go anywhere else. And they're not showing you anywhere else. It's like I will get to go to these places at some point, a bit like in, I don't know, any given Metroidvania game where you understand that you can get to locations at some point later on once you have the requisite
key,
key or
Well, I think that's an important point actually. Yeah, I think that's an important point because you do know that you're going immediately. You do know at some point you will go there because it doesn't just say this door is locked. It says this door is locked and it has the shield emblem or it has the helmet emblem or whatever the other emblems are. Yeah, so it's giving you just enough. So it's mystery again. I suppose that's that simple bit of text saying what kind of emblem it is as the mystery, because okay, I know that there's a key here with a symbol on it, but you don't know where that symbol is, or you don't. So you do know where the symbol is. It's on that key, but you don't know where the key is, and you don't know what that symbol means, and you don't know if. And you start to make links as well. So like if you see, okay, there's 2 or 3 doors with the same symbol, and then you don't have that symbol yet, and you can't unlock any of them. It's like, okay, are those doors linked in any way? Is something behind them going to have some sort of connection? And it doesn't.
Is one an exit, one an entry? Like, is that going to link round? Am I going to go in here and come out here at some point, or something to that effect? And those multiple keys tell you that it doesn't. Yeah, it's not just you need the key. It's like you need a particular type of key. That's telling you, there's multiple keys. It's all feeding into the design.
So Yeah, the illusion of space, that limiting of space, because it's a game of a lot of kind of paradoxes, I suppose, because the game is all about having things big but feel claustrophobic, having agency over what you do, or perceived agency over what you do, but then limiting everything to barely any ammo, barely any health. So yeah, I guess the mansion is another form of that, those kind of conflicts that the game's always forcing upon you to deal with.
And that I think feeds in also to the more you explore the mansion and you find those keys, you unlock the doors, the more the unfamiliar becomes familiar, and also in having you crisscross back through the mansion, which I think is often, I mean, we've done it as well. We talk about it in terms of backtracking. It's a different thing, though. It doesn't mean backtracking also is often used in a derogatory way, and it certainly doesn't mean that. But it is I kind of view it as this like crisscrossing back and forth, which it just happens that the thing that you need is over here, and you need to put that in a keyhole or whatever it might be in some other direction, and you're passing through that same space over and over again. So you're opening up, you're exploring the mansion, you're making it a more familiar space, which then allows that to be subverted, because other things can be introduced that then make those spaces unfamiliar again. You might run down a corridor you've run down a few times, but then all of a sudden there's a crash through the window or whatever it might be, or there's a zombie just around the corner, or a hunter later in the game that hadn't been there previously, and that allows for you to be kept on edge, which ties into the safe room stuff, which is the only place you're actually safe. Because you start to feel like you know this place. You start to feel like you've got a read on it, and then things can be done that kind of pull that rug out from underneath you once again.
Yeah, well, I think that's clever, because like it feels like at some point the mansion feels like it's becoming a friend, not other friends, but like becoming safer, I guess, because you're more familiar with it. But
you can use your knowledge of its layout to your advantage in some way, shape, or form. Even just to get from one place to another in the most efficient way. But
but it always reminds you that it's not a friend's. That they will always put something, or something else will very frequently come up that just flips very obviously, I suppose, very like in your face, like a dog coming through the window or whatever. But it's amazing how much of an impact just that one enemy change can have on not just that moment, but like every time you then go back through or like any time you see that same camera angle again, you've made that link in your mind.
Absolutely. It puts you on edge, and the trap rooms as well. You go, you've been used to going through. I don't know how many rooms exactly it is that you go through as Jill before you end up in a trap room that tries to kill you. But it's not many, and so but it's enough that you've kind of got used to. Okay, I'm walking through these spaces. You go into a trap room, and that then sets you up for the rest of the game to be just slightly wary of. I don't know, maybe I don't want to pick this crest off the wall. Maybe if I do pick this crest off the wall, I need to be ready for something to happen, for something to trigger, because this isn't just a benign space. It's actually, in some way, malevolent, and it's going to try and kill me where I stand.
Well, yeah, and I think the corridor sort of design adds to that, because you know that if something happens here, it's going to be a pain to avoid it. Like you can only really go backwards and forwards. There's no there's not much freedom in the lateral
particularly if you're already
movement.
on low health. So you start hugging the walls or something.
So what do? Do you try to risk it and hug the wall and run past whatever it is that's come, or do you just backtrack, like turn around and retreat, and then try to come back later? But at some point you're going to have to go through there. Like there's not always, there might be another route around, but if you haven't got all the keys you need, for example, or whatever, then you know that you will have to go back through there. So that corridor design sort of adds...
Well, it just it keeps you engaged, I think, doesn't it? Because even if they don't ever spring that gotcha, even if they only use it once and they don't do it again, you're thinking about it. You're moving and you're very deliberately engaged with that, and you're worrying about it, and you're playing the game in your head as much as you are.
Which is a core element of horror, isn't it? Like whether that's horror game, horror book, horror movie, whatever. Like the fear and the questions that you can create in your mind are more personal and more powerful and more impactful than anything that the game can just overtly show you through a visual or a jump scare or a sound effect or whatever. Like that feeling that, oh my god, like I don't know what's down there is much more scary. That's much scarier than I know exactly what's down there and I know exactly what I'm going to face. Like the unknown is much scarier, and I suppose that sort of feeds back to the doors at the start. Like it's scary not knowing what's behind those doors, that the doors don't have any windows, that you can't get any sense of what might be there. Yeah, you just make leaps as to what's there, and it's both simultaneously a positive leap and a negative one, I suppose, in that there's going to be positive rewards. Presumably there's going to be things that are going to help you, things that are going to help you progress through that door, but there's also going to be like, what challenges am I going to face through there? Is it going to be 3 zombies? Is it going to be some new kind of zombie? Is it going to be the ceiling that's going to crush me or whatever?
Yeah. And I think that use of like that mystery combined with the there's like a cavernous sense to even the most basic of rooms, like the dining room. As soon as you go into the mansion, the room on your left, I believe it is, the dining room we understand it to be a dining room. We understand the purpose of it. There's a table, there's chairs, maybe it's not an everyday room that it would be used for eating, but that is what takes place at some point, or has done in the past at some point in this room. But the proportions of it are weird in how big it is. I think we're quite used to, particularly when playing video games, you assess a space visually quite quickly. Like if you're playing an Uncharted game or any other given sort of game that you're directed through, you progress to a space and you have a fairly good understanding instinctively that I'm going to be fighting here. Like there's cover, there's multiple routes in and out. And in Resident Evil, the size of the rooms doesn't tell you anything. It's kind of misleading, and so you don't have that extra bit of information to use to, am I safe? Am I not? There's not going to be anything here. And in a game where, combined with this like notion of making some of the walkways or some of the corridors particularly narrow or just narrower, you don't know where you're going to be encountering those threats either. So you might be in a huge room, but there might be a choke point that you have to go up a staircase and go along a particular walkway, and it's there that you're going to encounter an enemy. And so there's this constant being on edge because you're not necessarily able to accurately read the game space based on what it looks like, which I think we're very used to doing.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I wonder if nowadays there's a school of thought that would say that that's bad design, because you're not giving the player enough information so that they can like preempt and feel fairly engaged with and not surprised, like, I just got attacked out of the blue, I didn't see that coming, like the game is really unfair, like how am I supposed to deal with
that notion of it being unfair. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, a lot of games do that. I suppose the rooms being different sizes but not being able to give away what they hold kind of plays into, like, you can't get a read, there's not a lot from the mansion that I think you can kind of pull on to make it feel like there's any degree of sort of comfort to take from it, again, apart from the safe rooms. Like, and I think as well, just aesthetically, the fact that it's so richly decorated, the fact that it's so grand, the fact that it's like, clearly some sort of millionaire, like in the UK it would be like some sort of royal residence or some sort of protected building or whatever, that people wouldn't actually live there.
It's not a new place, is it? It's been handed down and it's been around for generations.
Yeah, it's like some hereditary wealth fund that owns this thing, and but that grandeur sort of makes it seem impersonal to the point of like it's above you, like it's superior to you. It doesn't
cares nothing for you.
It doesn't care about your emotions. It doesn't care about the issues that you're going through. It doesn't care that there's zombies wandering around that's going to tear you up. Like it doesn't do much of anything to kind of help you in that. It's always sitting on that pedestal above you, looking down on you, almost as though like it itself is like the creator of this game, this sadistic game that it's like, you know, it is Jigsaw in the Saw movies, like Persona, like it is.
It's kind of indifferent to what happens within it. It's like there's like a characterization element of I've been here for a long time and I'll be here for a long time after this, and what is happening right now is just the latest chapter in.
Yeah, and it's almost like it's taking sadistic pleasure from it as well by telling you, right, you have to go back through this area now that I didn't that I threw this thing at you last time, or this is the last place, you know, in order to get to X location that is the only place you haven't explored yet, and there's these 3 ways of going there, but all of them have these, you know, pretty serious dangers to overcome. Like, I guess it's you don't have like full choice in it, do you? You don't have full agency as to where to go. Like, it's not like, okay, now I'm free to just go anywhere I want in the house and I'll do whatever I want. Like, you do have agency in the sense of, okay, here's 3 objectives. Like, there might be, I need to open this door, I've got to put that gem in somewhere, and then this emblem fits in this recess somewhere. And you have agency in the sense that you can often, not always, but often choose which order you want to do those things in. But at the end of the day, those are the things that you have to do. There's no like, I will just go and do whatever I want. Well, no, you can't. There are these things you have to do here. So there is a sense of linearity to it, even though it's not what we would typically call linear design. There is a sense of linearity to it in that your objectives are always the same as everyone else's. And I would also argue that the way that you go about solving them is, even in a simpler case, as getting, how do I get from A to B? I have the key and there's a door over there on the other side of the mansion. Now, how do I get over there? And it could be, you know, I think the prevailing opinion is that you can do anything you want in order to get there. There's 10 routes to get there and you're free to take any 10 of them. I would argue that's probably not true, because the game puts limitations on you that force your hand, really. So it puts, so you don't want to get injured. And there'll be zombies in certain areas. So that's going to lock off, say, 5 of those routes immediately. You want to be efficient with your gear, with your ammo, with your ink ribbons, whatever. So that's going to lock off some more routes. You might want to go to a safe room on the way, or you might want to go there to actually use an ink ribbon or to swap out your gear or whatever in the chest. So that's going to lock out some more. So you're probably down to 1 or maybe 2 paths as to how to go there. So actually, if you're playing the game with thoughts, with understanding and like reading your surroundings, there probably isn't a choice, really. The obvious decision will come to you. But I think the important thing isn't to pretend that the player has agency, that they can go and do whatever they want. It's to make them feel like they can still make an informed decision. Yeah. That they have autonomy over what decision they make, even if there's only one obvious choice. The important thing is to make the player feel like they've come to that decision. And even if there's only one, it's the best decision, so they're going to go with it. Like, it's the best decision out of several choices that can be made. And then it's at that point that allows you as a designer to then spring those surprises on the player that has gone the most, or the what could be considered the best route, the most logical route. And that's when you then get surprised by something else. And that's there's a multitude. I think that notion of having all the locked doors, just to circle back to something that you said a little while ago, having lots of locked doors, but that you're probably going to have to encounter them in either a certain order, or at the very least, maybe you get a key that opens 2 doors at the same time and you get to choose. Okay, great. But by having those different levels of locked doors and that a certain amount of linearity in that, I think the psychological effect of that is that you feel like you are progressing deeper into this thing. You're going through different levels of gated locations, and you're getting into you're kind of progressing from the outer to the inner. There's like this inner sanctum kind of idea. Yeah, you're going into the belly of the beast. Almost.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that is, that's well, we won't touch on too much on it. There isn't Evil 2 stuff, because I think there's probably a whole podcast that could be done for every single Resident Evil game. But there's a very distinct similarity there between the mansion in Resident Evil 1 and the police station in Resident Evil 2 for me, because that has a similar thing with this stateliness, this idea of like this this cold, impartial, like I don't care who you are. And in both cases for me, there's a subversion of your expectation, but also of your understanding of what those spaces are, what they're meant to represent. And in the one case, it's a mansion which, however imposing and grand it is, at some time or another, that was a home. And presumably, the expectation is, I think, that was built as a home and has been a family home. And that is then kind of perverted with all of the things that have gone on since. And similarly with the police station, it's like that's the bastion of order that you would run to in some sort of disastrous cataclysm like has happened to Raccoon City. And then that is subverted because, the police there are trying to eat you, and the chief is nuts.
Yeah, it's actually the most corrupt place before it all was kicked off. And now,
it was rotten, from the inside out, even before that. And so, those that's an important point for how I feel when I'm playing both of those games, that it's... I don't I don't sit there really like thinking about, it makes me shudder that this was once a home and look at what they've done to it. It's not that. It's just that playing on the expectation and your understanding of, far more than if you were storming far more than if you came at it from the other direction, I suppose. If you came into the lab bit and then you came up through, and there's a home here as well. It's like that's a very different type of scene setting and a very different like expectation to set. And you feel a very different way. So, I think those kinds of that subversion of expectation, I think, is part of its strength and part of why it remains so iconic and so memorable, because of everything they do.
Yeah,
having set up the kind of place this is meant to be.
Yeah, for sure. So, do you? Because I remember, actually, I don't know if I do explicitly remember playing the first Resident Evil when I first played it, because I first played it when I was like 12 years old. So obviously I shouldn't have been playing it based on the age rating.
I do remember. Yeah, I remember a bit more. I was a bit older.
But do you remember, because I remember Resident Evil 2 and the location and the police station in particular, Resident Evil 2, when I first played it in the 90s, when I was a lot younger, standing out to me much more than the mansion in Resident Evil 1, being much more memorable. Now that might have been because I was that bit older when I played Resident Evil 2, so I was more aware of things, I was picking up more. But since then, playing the remakes, whilst I love Resident Evil 2 remake, and it would be the one that I would definitely play more often than the Resident Evil 1 remake, I think I've switched opinion now, and actually, location-wise, the mansion in Resident Evil 1 is more impactful and more interesting than the police station in Resident Evil 2, even though I obviously love that location as well. So it's kind of flipped on me, I suppose, from the PS1 originals to the remakes. But is that the way that you think about it? Well,
so mine's slightly biased by the fact
better than the other.
Well, I mean, certainly the mansion for me is more memorable, but that is biased by the fact that I, back in the day, had a Nintendo 64 and didn't have a PlayStation 1 for quite a while. But I swapped, this was in the days when, with a friend, I swapped a console, I swapped my Nintendo 64 and whatever games I had for that, on a loan period, not permanently, but with a friend who had a PlayStation and Resident Evil and Tomb Raider. And so I played Resident Evil a lot, the original game. I didn't know I was doing it at the time, but I did some speed running or certainly some challenges of try and complete it with only using, 6 ink ribbons or less or something like that. So I played and explored that mansion a lot more because I had that machine for a certain amount of time. And that was one of the few games I had on it to play. I played that a lot more than I did Resident Evil 2. So I remember 2 fondly, and I remember playing it at the time. But yeah, there is that kind of just familiarity bias for me because I played it a lot more, and so it's memorable. I think it remains memorable, but it is, for me specifically, there's a kind of a repetition element there because I went through that mansion a lot. So yeah, it has remained. Yeah, for me, it's remained kind of the probably the pinnacle of the series, not in terms of a best or anything like that, but just in terms of the most memorable, my favourite, and for everything that it meant at the time, and yeah, like you said at the beginning, in relation to what else was out there at the time and had been done at that point, it was it had impact then and has stayed with me for 20 something years, nearly 25 years.
Well, it's interesting how it has become so, and I suppose so memorable, and I suppose that it speaks sort of clearly to the quality of its design in that when the remake comes out, and at least the Resident Evil 1 remake is very true to, it's literally a remake. It's a master.
Just like an update. Yeah, it's not the same as the Resident Evil 2 remake, is it? It's
no, 2 and 3 were genuinely like overhauls, like sort of take the design document and build from there rather than take the game, the original game, and remake it. But it speaks to the original's quality that when you play through that Resident Evil 1 remake, remaster, like, yeah, it feels old-fashioned, it feels kind of outdated in a lot of ways, but it's not in a bad way. Like, it feels classic, it doesn't feel like, oh, this is irritating, this is a bit obtuse or whatever. Like, it's it feels it stood the test of time better than
Tomb Raider has, for example, the original Tomb Raider, which I also had at the same time I had that, and I loved. I mean, I absolutely loved Tomb Raider. But yeah, it doesn't stand up. On a very basic level, it's like when there are very stylized visuals in something, and it's not just trying to use the latest. Star Wars is the obvious example, isn't it? Where it's like we're using physical models in the original trilogy, and they stand up an awful lot better visually. I don't mean in any other way, like the comparisons are obvious, but visually they stand up better than the prequel trilogy because that was very CGI heavy. It's very of the time, I'm sure probably looked great at the time, but it doesn't take long for that to age. Whereas the stylized, it stands up a lot better, and that's I think what's happened with Resident Evil. Those stylistic choices have made it stand up a lot better than a fully 3D game like Tomb Raider.
Yeah, and especially the mansion as well. Like to make it more relevant, the final thought for the mansion, there's no mansion episode. Like it like the design of the mansion is great. Like the design of the mansion is still it feels like you go back and play it, there's a lot of similarities between it and like high quality Metroidvania games like Ori and the Blind Forest, Hollow Knight, that sort of stuff. Like huge amount of similarities between how the Resident Evil mansion was designed and how those games are designed. And like when you're playing through it, like it just still retains that everything that is. I suppose it's one of those classic games where everything that is promised about it and everything where people say like, oh, this is great, like this is amazing, like it really it still is now. Like you don't have to. Well, I don't know because I don't speak from experience, but I would say that you don't need to have been around and playing games when that original came out in order to appreciate the quality of that level design now. There you have it, Resident Evil 1's Mansion. Now, don't forget that next week's podcast will be a discussion of the game as a whole in celebration of its 25th anniversary, so do make sure you're subscribed so as not to miss out. Do also come check us out on Twitter. We are at Indie by Design. We are also at Indie by Design on all other social media platforms. And also visit our website, indiebydesign.net, to check out the books we've made. Pre-orders are right now still open for 20 Double Fine years, which is our tome celebrating the art, culture and history of Double Fine Productions. That includes all of the Tim Schafer games, Psychonauts 1 and 2, Brutal Legend, Grim Fandango, Day of the Tentacle, Full Throttle, Broken Age, as well as the studio's wider work, not least Stacking, Costume Quest and The Cave. That's available at indiebydesign.net, and really do check it out. We've had incredible access from Double Fine. We've got tens of hours of original interviews, we've got unlimited access to the art archives, and we're really proud of what we've done, so do come check it out and see if you're interested. Otherwise, thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next week.